Have you ever heard the quote, "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies"? It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? In our always-on, constantly scrolling world, where we're bombarded with quick bits of information, fast-changing trends, instant gratification, it's easy to wonder if books still hold the same profound power they once did. But what if the quiet act of reading, especially, deep reading, is actually more crucial now than ever? What if it's not just a pastime, but like a powerful antidote to some of the biggest challenges of modern society? Today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that, the enduring and maybe increasingly vital power of books in our digital age.
That's an excellent framing for our deep dive today. Really sets the stage. Our sources for this exploration, they really delve into the profound impact of reading. Everything from enhancing our understanding of others, sharpening our critical thinking, to bolstering our mental well-being, and even, surprisingly, protecting democratic societies. It's quite a range. We'll be pulling insights from articles like How Reading Fiction Increases Empathy from Discover Magazine, Phil Rosen's blog post, the one titled Reading Books is the Antidote to Everything Wrong with Modern Society, and pieces from Psychology Today, Telefonica, the VWG Yaor group of schools, plus Paul D. Wilkes' really thought-provoking insights on why is deep reading important. So, yes, our mission is basically to help you understand why this ancient practice remains so utterly vital, maybe more powerful than ever in our fast-paced digital world.
Okay, so let's unpack this and maybe start with a bit of history. It feels like for decades, really, we've heard these predictions about the death of the book. Remember all the concerns back in the 1990s when digital culture, the internet, really started taking off. A lot of critics thought books would just, go the way of the horse and buggy, become charming maybe, but totally irrelevant anachronisms. And our sources point out this wasn't even new then. It echoed fears from the 50s when TV first showed up. So the big question is, were they right? Did books die out? Did they fade away?
Well, that's what's truly fascinating here, and something our sources really highlight with a remarkable clarity, is how incredibly resilient books have proven to be. Despite those early predictions, which, as the Psychology Today piece reminds us, kind of pop up whenever new media emerges, print culture has emphatically not become obsolete. Not at all.
So people are still reading, like actually buying books.
Absolutely. Far from it, in fact. Reading books, whether it's the traditional hard copy or, digitally on an e-reader, it remains a remarkably popular activity. It endures, and the data shows this resilience. Publishers Weekly reported a pretty significant 9% rise in print book sales in 2021 alone.
Wow, 9%, even with everything else competing for attention.
Exactly. Now, part of that surge was definitely influenced by the pandemic, right? People were looking for comfort, escape during lockdowns. But it also seems to reflect something deeper, a persistent human need that books are sort of uniquely positioned to fulfill. So it directly challenges that whole narrative of their impending demise, which naturally raises the question.
Why? Why do they endure? What is it about these things, paper and ink, or even pixels on a screen, that keeps them so important?
Yeah, what's the secret sauce?
Yeah.
Especially when you've got dazzling films, endless social media scrolls, super immersive video games.
Yeah.
Why pick up a book? What's this unique magic?
Right. What is it?
The sources offer some really beautiful, quite profound insights into this appeal. It paints a picture that goes way beyond just, killing time. Carmen Martin Gate. She's a Spanish writer. She expressed it beautifully back in 1989, way before the current digital chaos. She said reading provides insight into a secret world that liberates one from the hostile pressures of the environment, from the routines and deceptions that confrontation with reality produces.
A secret world. I like that. Like an escape hatch.
Exactly. And she specifically called the deep concentration needed for deliberate reading a miraculous feat. Like a conscious effort to find calm and focus in a world that's just getting more and more frantic. It really taps into that core human need for refuge, for quiet contemplation.
That phrase, miraculous feat of focus, it really resonates, doesn't it? That idea of a quiet internal refuge in this overwhelmingly noisy world, like a mental sanctuary you can just step into.
Precisely. And Victor Neal, in his 1988 book, Lost in a Book, The Psychology of Reading for Pleasure, he echoed that exact sentiment. He described reading as rousing, colorful, and transfiguring as anything out there in the real world.
Wow, as transfiguring as the real world. That's a bold claim.
It is. He didn't see it as just a pastime. He saw it as this rare chance to acquire peace, become more powerful, and feel braver and wiser. These descriptions, they really elevate reading beyond simple leisure, don't they? They present it almost as a basic human drive, rooted deep in our cognition, an activity that fundamentally reshapes our inner landscape.
Yeah, it makes you think. Think about the last time you truly got lost in a book. You know that feeling. Where the world just melts away, that feeling of escape, that sense of calm washing over you, your inner world just expanding. You're totally present in the story, oblivious to everything else.
Hmm. That's the magic they're talking about. And it's such a vital contrast to the fragmented attention that, let's be honest, often defines modern life. Reading offers this deep, sustained engagement that's becoming increasingly rare and really precious.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. And where that quote we started with, "A reader lives 1,000 lives," seems to have some serious scientific backing. One of the most compelling arguments for reading, especially fiction, is its dramatic impact on empathy. It's not just some nice poetic idea. It seems rooted firmly in our psychology, maybe even our brain function.
Indeed. Psychologists have studied empathy a lot. They found that it is, to some extent, innate. Even tiny babies show basic forms of it. But, and this is crucial, while some people might naturally be more empathetic, it's a trait that can absolutely be cultivated. It can be strengthened throughout life.
Okay, so you can work on it. It's like a muscle.
Exactly. Our sources indicate that practicing positive social behaviors, like genuinely trying to get to know others, engaging with different perspectives, consciously putting yourself in their shoes, these are key. And fiction specifically offers this unique and really powerful way to do that. As psychologist William Chopik from the University of Michigan puts it, fiction provides a safe distance way to exercise those empathic skills.
Safe and distanced, meaning you can practice understanding people without like real-world awkwardness or consequences.
Precisely. It's a low-stakes environment where you can practice a very high-stakes social skill. It lets you build that empathy muscle gradually, thoughtfully.
So how does that actually work? How does just turning pages, getting lost in a story, translate into being better at understanding real people in the real world? What's the mechanism?
Keith Oatley, he's interesting because he's both a novelist and a professor emeritus of cognitive psychology. He explains it beautifully. He says, reading novels enables us to become better at actually understanding other people and what they're up to. Simple as that, almost. But he highlights a critical difference. You might get deep understanding from a close friend, sure, over years, but fiction lets you sample across a much wider range of possible people and understand something about the differences among them.
So it broadens your sample size of humanity in a way.
Exactly. The core mechanism is fiction's incredible ability to transport you directly into another character's mind. You see the world through their eyes. You feel their emotions. You understand their motivations, their struggles, their joys vicariously. And this exposure introduces you to life circumstances, perspectives, emotional landscapes that might be vastly different from your own everyday reality.
Like what? Can you give some examples?
Oh, sure. Imagine, just 2 words on a page, experiencing what it's like to, say, lose a child, or be caught up in a war, or be born into deep poverty, or immigrate to a completely new country, or even just live life as a different gender, ethnicity, culture, sexuality, profession, or age than your own. Fiction lets you inhabit those lives, and that vicarious experience, it profoundly influences how we relate to actual people in the real world. It broadens our perspective way beyond our immediate bubble, fostering a deeper sense of shared humanity.
And you mentioned research, so this isn't just theory, it's something they've actually measured.
Yes, absolutely. Oatley and his colleagues, they published a pretty significant study back in 2006. It provided strong empirical evidence for this very link. They demonstrated a direct relationship between reading fiction and performing better on widely used empathy and social acumen tests.
How did they measure that?
Well, they first assessed participants' familiarity with various fiction authors, sort of as a proxy for how much fiction they likely read. Then, these participants took 2 key psychological tests. One was the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, that's a standard scale, measuring how well people understand and share others' feelings, different facets of empathy, and the other was the Mind of the Eyes assessment. That's where you just see pictures of people's eyes and have to guess their emotions. It gauges your ability to read subtle, nonverbal social cues.
Okay, so reading faces, basically. Or eyes, anyway.
Right. And crucially, the team found a clear correlation. The more fiction authors participants knew, suggesting they read more fiction, the higher they scored on both of these empathy tests. And the research strongly suggests it's the act of reading fiction itself that promotes this change. It's not just that empathetic people happen to read more fiction.
So the reading seems to cause the increase in empathy, not the other way around.
That's what the evidence points towards, yes. The cause and effect seems to flow directly from the reading to the enhanced empathy.
That's powerful. But, okay, here's a nuance I found really fascinating in our sources. Apparently, not all fiction is created equal when it comes to boosting empathy. There's a distinction.
That's a really critical distinction, yes, and the research highlights it quite insightfully. A 2013 paper, published in Science no less, dug into this specific question. They assigned participants to read either literary fiction, genre fiction, nonfiction, or nothing at all. And their key finding was pretty striking. People who read literary fiction showed the most improvement on theory of mind tests.
Theory of mind. Remind us what that is again.
Right. Theory of mind is our crucial cognitive ability to understand that other people have their own beliefs, desires, intentions, perspectives, things that might be totally different from our own. It's really a foundational piece of empathy. It allows us to anticipate and understand why people do what they do.
Got it. So literary fiction boosted that specifically, more than other types.
Exactly. Participants who read nonfiction or popular genre fiction or nothing, they didn't experience a similar boost in their scores on those tests. And the researchers noted why this might be. Literary fiction, think works like Toni Morrison's Beloved or maybe Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. These works tend to put a much greater emphasis on deep, complex character development.
Okay, so less about the plot, more about the people.
Often, yes. These narratives frequently disrupt reader expectations. They might feature ambiguous characters, unreliable narrators, plots that don't follow a neat, predictable path. This forces readers to grapple with nuance, uncertainty, internal conflict. It challenges their perspectives and encourages them to think more deeply about human nature, motivations, complexities.
Right, they make you work a bit harder mentally.
They do. In contrast, genre fiction, say, a Danielle Steele romance or a John Grisham legal thriller, typically takes a more plot-driven approach. Now, they're often immensely entertaining, real page-turners, right? But they frequently stick to more consistent themes, maybe more predictable character arcs, which tends to reinforce readers' existing views rather than actively challenging or expanding them.
So the complexity and ambiguity of literary fiction is key.
It seems that way. The depth of psychological exploration, the intentional disruption of reader expectations, those appear to be key ingredients in its unique empathy-boosting power.
That's incredibly insightful. And thinking about the real world, this sounds like it could have a truly profound impact on how we perceive and relate to people who are different from us, especially when we talk about breaking down biases, fostering understanding.
It absolutely does. And this is where some of the most compelling examples of fiction's influence really shine studies looking specifically at attitudes towards stigmatized groups. For instance, a 2014 study found that elementary and high school students in Italy and the UK became significantly more empathic toward immigrants, refugees, and gay and lesbian people after reading the Harry Potter series.
Harry Potter? Really? How did that work?
Well, the researchers explained it by noting that, quote, "The world of Harry Potter is characterized by strict social hierarchies and resulting prejudices with obvious parallels with our society. Think about the discrimination against muggles or mudbloods, or the prejudice faced by house elves or goblins. These narratives provided a relatable, often allegorical way for students to understand the destructive nature of real-world prejudice."
Ah, okay, so it uses fantasy to comment on reality. Makes sense.
Precisely. And that same year, another research team found even more direct evidence. They had people read Saffron Dreams. That's a fictional account of a Muslim woman of Middle Eastern descent in New York who faces racist attacks after 9/11. And the readers showed significantly less negative bias toward people of different races or ethnicities afterwards. The effect was quite strong.
Wow. And did they compare that to just reading facts about the issue?
They did, and this is crucial. Participants who only read a summary of the book, or who read a work of nonfiction covering similar themes, did not show that same shift in views.
Right.
It powerfully highlights the unique impact of narrative immersion, really living inside the story, feeling the characters' experiences vicariously. It's different from just absorbing facts.
It's about feeling it, not just knowing it.
Exactly. It engages you on a deeply emotional level, not just an intellectual one.
So, okay, with all this evidence piling up for empathy, what does this ultimately mean for promoting kindness, for pro-social behavior in the world? Can reading actually make us, collectively, better people?
Well, Sarah Conrath, she's a researcher at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, points out that while there's maybe less direct research on reading's specific effects on actions like giving money or volunteering time, empathy is universally recognized as a primary motivation for that kind of kindness.
Right. You feel for someone, so you help them.
Exactly. So she believes that reading books can help to promote more kindness overall by building that foundational empathic capacity. Makes sense, right? However, she adds a really crucial caveat. Like any media, she says, it probably depends on the content.
The content matters. It's not just the act of reading anything.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
As a stark example, she notes that Hitler's Mein Kampf was a book that actively promoted hate and division. It vividly illustrates that the message, the intent behind the words, matters immensely. It's not just that you read, but what you read and how you engage with its message that shapes you and how you interact with the world.
That's a sobering but really important point. Okay, so cultivating empathy is clearly a huge game-changing benefit, but it feels like reading does so much more, right? For our brains, our personal development, it seems foundational.
It certainly does. Our sources lay out a really compelling, quite comprehensive case for reading as a cornerstone of overall cognitive development. It extends far beyond just interpersonal skills.
We live in this world of information overload, right?
Right.
Always skimming articles, scanning posts. There's that vast ocean of knowledge out there, as you said, but books feel different, deeper. How do they achieve that?
Exactly. While the internet offers that vast ocean, books, as the BBG or group of schools puts it so nicely, provide deep dives. Unlike just skimming Wikipedia or scrolling a newsfeed, reading a book cultivates deeper knowledge and understanding. It demands sustained attention, immersive engagement.
Can you give an example of that kind of deep dive?
Sure. They mention exploring the complex, fantastical world of Narnia and C.S. Lewis's books, where kids literally step into another reality with its own history, rules, and moral struggles. Or unraveling the intricate mysteries of Egyptian mythology with Rick Riordan's Kane Chronicles, involving siblings discovering this whole hidden magical heritage. These stories require sustained attention. They weave complex plots, develop nuanced characters, build rich, detailed worlds. And that sustained engagement, it really transports you beyond the screen. You inhabit these other worlds, other perspectives. It fosters a depth of understanding that short-form content just can't replicate.
Right, you can't just dip in and out. You have to commit.
You do. And cognitive neuroscientist Marianne Wolf, she's cited in the Steel Snowflake article, sheds more light on this. She describes how the present reading brain enables the development of some of our most important intellectual and affective processes. Things like internalized knowledge, analogical reasoning, inference, figuring things out between the lines, perspective taking, empathy, critical analysis, generating insight. All of it.
Wow, that's a lot. So reading basically builds the machinery for thinking.
In a way, yes. She argues that the more we read, the better our reading brain gets at all these complex functions, becomes a more critically thinking brain, better able to analyze complexity, spot nuance, make sophisticated connections. She even likens it to accumulating intellectual capital that compounds over time.
Intellectual capital, I like that, like investing in your brain.
Exactly. Just like financial capital grows with consistent investment, your mental capital, your ability to think deeply, critically, creatively, it expands exponentially with every book you really engage with. It's not just about facts, it's about building a stronger, more agile mind.
And a vocabulary, too. I mean, I've always felt reading expands your vocabulary almost automatically, but the sources really stress how fundamental that is to, well, everything else.
It truly is unparalleled for language development. Books are described everywhere as unparalleled resources for this. Why? Because they expose us to such incredibly rich, diverse vocabulary, varied sentence structures, countless different writing styles, way more than everyday conversation usually does. The UICP source gives the example of reading classics like Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. It immerses you in sophisticated language and complex themes that just naturally challenge and expand your linguistic toolkit.
You just absorb it by reading.
To a large extent, yes. As you encounter new words and phrases in context, you naturally expand your vocabulary. And that directly, profoundly improves both your writing and your speaking skills. You don't just understand more words, you learn how to use them effectively, precisely. And having a robust vocabulary isn't just about knowing fancy words. It significantly enhances your reading fluency.
Fluency meaning reading smoothly.
Yeah, the ability to read effortlessly, accurately, and with the right expression. When you have a big vocabulary, you recognize words quickly, you understand their nuances, you grasp the intended meaning without constantly stopping. This leads to smoother, more enjoyable reading and deeper, uninterrupted engagement with the text itself.
Makes sense. Less friction.
Exactly. And beyond reading, a diverse vocabulary gives you a broader, more precise palette of words to choose from when you're trying to express yourself. This lets you articulate your thoughts, your ideas, much more accurately, persuasively, clearly. It ultimately promotes much better writing skills, too, just through that constant exposure to varied and effective language. It's a real building block for communication.
Okay, so better thinking, better talking, better writing. What about just feeling better? Reading seems to offer this profound sense of comfort too, right? It impacts our mental state.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a powerful tool for mental well-being, maybe one we often underestimate. The Psychology Today article highlights this key concept, narrative absorption.
Narrative absorption. What's that?
It's that experience of being deeply immersed, totally engaged while reading a story. You know, when you're completely in it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that isn't just inherently pleasurable, though it often is. It also significantly enhances our sense of well-being. How? By allowing us to mentally transport ourselves away from our immediate surroundings, our worries. It provides either a much-needed escape from daily stress or sometimes an opportunity for quiet, meaningful contemplation.
It's like a mental vacation.
Sort of. When you're truly absorbed, your brain is so focused on the story's world, the characters, the plot, that it effectively shifts processing power away from your own anxieties or daily grind. It's like this focused detachment that lets your mind decompress. It creates a quiet mental space that can literally help retune your brain chemistry towards calm.
Wow. And does that affect last? Or is it just while you're reading?
That's the amazing part. The health impacts can last long after you put the book down. It shows real therapeutic potential. Some research shows significant reductions in depression symptoms that persist for months, even years, in adults who engage with reading regularly.
Months or years from reading.
It sounds surprising, but yes. And maybe even more surprisingly, reading isn't just linked to feeling better, but potentially to living longer. One large study found that older adults who regularly read books had a remarkable 20% reduction in mortality compared to those who didn't read.
20%, that's huge. How could that be?
Well, it suggests a deeper connection, maybe the consistent cognitive engagement, the stress reduction from reading. Maybe it has profound positive effects on brain chemistry, overall health, longevity. It really seems to act like a healing therapeutic agent.
That's incredible. And I remember one source mentioned something called bibliotherapy. Is that related?
Yeah.
Using books as actual therapy.
It is, yes. Bibliotherapy is essentially the therapeutic use of selected reading material to support mental health. It can address various challenges, anxiety, depression, grief, even things like chronic pain management.
How does it work in practice?
It typically involves reading specific literature, could be self-help, could be fiction, poetry, nonfiction, related to whatever the person's going through. Then there's reflection and discussion. This might happen one-on-one with a therapist or in a structured group setting, or even independently, maybe following curated reading lists. A therapist isn't always involved.
And does it actually help? Is there evidence?
Research has shown some really promising results. For instance, it's been shown to alleviate depressive symptoms in surgery patients. It can decrease cognitive and emotional symptoms in dementia patients by stimulating memory and engagement. It's even shown potential for improving functioning in patients with psychosis by providing structure and focus.
Wow. So quite a range of applications.
Definitely. And it's seen as highly accessible, pretty low cost. It even proved beneficial during really uncertain times, like the COVID-19 pandemic. It can promote autonomy, a sense of agency when maybe external control feels limited. It gives you a pathway to understanding complex emotions yourself.
That makes a lot of sense, giving people tools to understand themselves.
And this therapeutic power extends powerfully to young people's mental health, too. Take the One Book Baltimore program, for example. It's this great community initiative. 10,000 7th and 8th graders in Baltimore City Public Schools all read the same book. Jason Reynolds, Long Way Down.
And that book deals with youth violence, right? Heavy
Yeah.
stuff.
Very heavy stuff. But the program generated these incredibly productive conversations about complex and sensitive topics like violence, grief, and mental health, often in classrooms or community groups. For many students who had directly experienced violence or its impact, identifying with characters facing similar struggles offered real comfort. It gave them a sense of not being alone. And it provided a starting point for dialogue, for creativity, for connection within their community. It really turned reading into this shared healing experience. It built resilience, fostered vital communication around tough realities.
Okay, so we've established all these incredible, truly life-changing benefits of deep reading, empathy, cognition, vocabulary, mental health. Yet it still feels like people are reading less, or at least less deeply. What's going on? What are the big challenges?
Yeah, that's the paradox, isn't it? And the sources highlight this significant, slightly unsettling contradiction. On one hand, it's true that in the digital world, we might actually be reading more words than ever before in history. Think about it, texts, emails, social media, online articles. We scan constantly.
Right, we're definitely reading something all the time.
But, and this is the crucial but, it has largely become a form of superficial reading. The habit, and maybe even the underlying ability, to engage deeply with long, complex texts that seems to be actively declining. The Ljubljana Reading Manifesto, this powerful declaration on reading's importance, explicitly states that reading comprehension is declining, and it identifies this decline as undermining a fundamental ability necessary for any kind of real depth of thought.
So it's not just that we're reading less, but how we read is changing, and maybe not for the better.
That seems to be the core concern, yes.
So what does that mean for us, personally, collectively, if we're losing the capacity to really focus on long-form content, to absorb complex ideas? What are the consequences?
Well, the sources argue it leaves us significantly vulnerable. Starkly put, really. Without that developed ability to engage with detailed arguments, nuanced perspectives, long narratives, we're left mostly with headlines, with fragments, without context.
Just the snippets, the sound bites.
Exactly. And that, in turn, can generate an almost instinctive reaction, devoid of reflection, which, in general, will tend to be simple and polarized. Think about how quickly outrage can flare up online based on a single tweet, maybe taken out of context. There's no time for nuance. Paul D. Wilk, in his Steel Snowflake piece, he laments this. He talks about people in his own life, especially younger folks, who grew up immersed in screens, openly admitting they just can't concentrate long enough to finish an entire book anymore.
That's worrying. It's not just preference. It's like a loss of capacity.
That's the concern. It represents a potential shift in how we fundamentally process information, possibly impacting our very ability for nuanced thought, for critical discernment.
And it feels like our devices are part of the problem, right? They connect us, sure, but they also seem to be actively working against deep reading, constantly buzzing, pinging. I know I find myself reaching for my phone instinctively sometimes, even when I don't know why. Just craving that next little hit of information or distraction. Our brains literally being reshaped.
You've hit on a really crucial observation there. And yes, the sources suggest our devices certainly present a significant headwind. Nicholas Carr, who wrote The Shallows. What the internet is doing to our brains, he offers this compelling observation. What the net seems to be doing is chipping away my capacity for concentration or contemplation.
Chipping away, like erosion.
Exactly. His work really dives into the neurological impact. He suggests our minds are being retrained to expect information in a swiftly moving stream of particles, a constant flow of bite-sized updates, notifications, alerts. And when our brains are constantly primed for that rapid, shallow intake, they become less efficient at sustaining the deep, focused attention needed for complex, long-form reading.
So we shift from diving deep to just skimming the surface as our default.
That seems to be the trend. It contributes to what the writer David Perell calls the never-ending now.
The never-ending now. What does that mean?
It means most of what people consume has been created within, say, the last 24 hours. News cycles, social media feeds. It's all immediate. And the effect, Perell argues, is that it makes us blind to our place in history and culture. Our mental landscape gets dominated by the most immediate, often the most sensational, rather than the enduring or the foundational ideas.
We lose context. We lose perspective.
Precisely. We sever that connection to the rich intellectual heritage of the past when we're only focused on the absolute present. And alongside these powerful tech factors, our sources point to other things conspiring against deep reading. Things like, well, sheer mental laziness. Sometimes scrolling is easier than concentrating. That pervasive lack of sustained attention we just discussed. A perceived lack of time. Impatience, born from always getting instant gratification online. And even just a perceived lack of usefulness for deep reading, when quick answers seem readily available via search engines.
Some of those sound like excuses, maybe.
They might partly be. We all somehow find hours for doom scrolling or binge watching, right? But collectively, they form this negative feedback loop. Not reading deeply leads to reading worse. Because, as the sources emphasize repeatedly, reading well also requires practice.
It's a skill, like a muscle. Use it or lose it.
Exactly. It atrophies if it's not regularly exercised.
And it's not just mindless scrolling that's the issue, is it? The sources suggested that even mediums that seem educational, maybe even like this deep dive itself, might have a subtle downside. That's
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
It isn't uncomfortable, but yeah, a crucial point raised in Phil Rosen's blog post. He makes this argument. He says that while popular mediums like podcasts, giving history lessons, or even complex multi-season Netflix dramas, while they lower the barrier to accessing high-level material, they also deliver information passively. They require minimal effort to consume.
Passively, meaning we just sit back and absorb it.
Right. Rosen explicitly shares his own experience. He admits he's never listened to one podcast that stuck with me long enough for me to talk about it with any coherence more than a couple days later.
Mm.
And he contrasts that starkly with books that have stayed with me for years, really shaping his thinking.
That's a strong claim. Podcasts don't stick.
His argument is that the passive nature makes retention harder. The core issue, as he sees it, is that these mediums ask too little of the audience.
Right.
They lead to neither participation nor challenge. The cognitive effort involved in deeply reading a book, actively constructing meaning, making inferences, grappling with complex prose, it's just far greater than passively listening or watching.
So the effort itself helps make it stick.
That seems to be the idea. Columnist Janet Ganesh from the Financial Times wrote about this too. He observed that people are willing to do almost anything other than read at length. Why? Because reading requires patience, an atrophied muscle in the smartphone age. Yet, ironically, he points out, the desire for self-improvement out there is real. People want to learn and grow.
So there's a conflict. We want the knowledge, maybe not the effort.
Exactly. It's about squaring those opposing impulses.
Yeah.
The genuine aspiration for wisdom versus the atrophy of the patience and sustained mental effort needed to acquire it deeply.
Okay, this is starting to sound like it goes way beyond just personal habits or whether we remember podcast details. If we're collectively losing the ability to read deeply, to think critically, what does that mean for society? The implications seem quite serious, especially with things like, well, democracy.
This is perhaps the most serious, most alarming implication that our sources raise, particularly the Jubal Jana Reading Manifesto. It states, quite gravely, if there are no young readers and writers, there will soon be no old ones. The culture of the written word will be dead, and with it, democracy.
Wow, that's blunt. Reading is a prerequisite for democracy.
That's their position. They argue that being able to read complex texts is fundamental. Without the critical thinking skills, the capacity for nuance, the sustained attention fostered by close reading, we are unprepared to counter populist simplifications, conspiracy theories, and misinformation, and consequently, we become vulnerable to manipulation.
So inability to read deeply makes us easier to manipulate.
That's the argument. The ability to discern nuance in complex texts, to follow extended arguments, to critically evaluate sources, it's all seen as absolutely essential for informed civic participation in a healthy democracy. Without it, the foundations start to wobble.
That's a heavy thought.
It is. And Paul D. Wilk from Steel Snowflake makes an even bolder, more direct claim about this societal threat. He says, as our attention autonomy withers, so goes our ability to manage a healthy democracy governed by well-informed citizens.
Attention autonomy, meaning our control over our own focus.
Exactly. He states that victims of misinformation often, quote, haven't developed the intellectual tools needed to step back and critically examine ideas and concepts. They lack the internal frameworks to spot logical fallacies, recognize emotional manipulation, question biased narratives. And this makes them uniquely vulnerable to propaganda and conspiracy thinking, because complex issues get simplified into these easily digestible, often distorted narratives that play on emotion, not reason.
It's a direct link between reading habits and democratic health.
A very direct and, frankly, chilling link being drawn here, yes.
And we've seen worrying examples of this playing out, haven't we, in the real world? The consequences seem visible in our public discourse, our politics.
Indeed. The sources point out how social media platforms, specifically by promoting these more shallow forms of reading and prioritizing rapid bite-sized content, have, maybe unintentionally, facilitated the rise of a new generation of populist demagogues.
How so?
Well, readers increasingly get their news from social media feeds. And those feeds are algorithmically designed to subtly nudge them toward ever more partisan content. This creates echo chambers, reinforces existing biases, rather than challenging them with diverse perspectives. The specific example given is the reliance, by millions, on a former American president's Twitter feed as a kind of ground truth source, completely bypassing traditional, more nuanced news outlets.
Right. Direct, unmediated, often inflammatory communication.
Exactly. Devoid of context, fact-checking,
Right.
allowing simplified narratives to spread like wildfire. And this raises a really pressing, critical question posed by the sources. Is this recent triumph of shallow reading a harbinger of things to come for our democratic societies?
A warning sign.
The stark warning sign, yes, about the fragility of informed citizenry when attention is fragmented and misinformation is everywhere.
Okay, so given all these profound benefits and these significant, frankly, alarming challenges, what can we actually do as individuals? How can we reclaim or cultivate deep reading in our own lives? It feels a bit overwhelming. Where do we start?
That's the vital question, isn't it? And thankfully, our sources do offer practical, insightful strategies. It's not hopeless. Phil Rosen, the guy who reads about 50 books a year, he says something interesting. There are no hacks, secrets, or shortcuts.
No magic bullet, then.
Apparently not. His approach is elegantly simple. He just makes time to sit quietly with a book each day, whether that's on his subway commute, during meals, or setting aside dedicated time before bed. He really emphasizes it's not about speed reading, not about rushing. It's about making reading a consistent, non-negotiable daily routine, even if it's just 15 or 20 minutes.
Consistency over quantity, maybe.
Exactly. And the knowledge gained from that consistent reading, he notes, it compounds. And that knowledge, quote, has the potential to transform into wisdom, which pays dividends over a lifetime. It's about building that sustainable habit, one quiet, focused moment at a time, recognizing that these small, consistent investments yield exponential returns in intellectual growth later on.
That's encouraging. Start small, be consistent.
And the UNCP source also provides a set of really practical strategies, specifically focused on vocabulary development, which, as we discussed, is key for deeper reading. These include things like encouraging the use of contextual clues, teaching yourself how to figure out unfamiliar words from the surrounding text. Also, learning how to use a dictionary effectively. Seems basic, but it's important.
Right.
Engaging in interactive word games or activities, making it fun. Maintaining a word journal. Actively writing down new words, definitions, maybe using them in a sentence. And finally, incorporating explicit vocabulary instruction, maybe consciously deciding to learn a new word each day or focusing on words related to a topic you're interested in.
So active strategies to build that foundation.
Yes. These things actively support building a strong vocabulary, and crucially, they help foster a lifelong love for reading by making it more accessible, more enjoyable, more rewarding, less frustrating.
Okay, so individual effort is key. But this isn't just about individuals, is it? What about a broader societal approach? Education? Community? They must have a role.
Oh, absolutely. It extends far beyond just personal discipline. It really requires a collective, societal commitment to value and protect deep reading. The Ljubljana Reading Manifesto, for instance, it closes with this clear, passionate call for reading education and promotion. And they stress this needs to go beyond just teaching basic functional literacy in schools.
So more than just learning how to read.
Yes, it aims to focus on the lifelong process of personal development, enhanced by higher-level reading. It's this recognition that reading is a continuous, evolving journey that needs nurturing throughout a person's entire life, not just in childhood. It means creating environments in schools, libraries, communities, even workplaces where deep reading is valued, encouraged, actively supported at every age.
And community programs can help with that.
Definitely. We saw how effective One Book Baltimore was, turning reading into a shared experience, fostering dialogue. Similarly, the VBGYR Graders Club is mentioned as an example of a structured approach within schools. They actively nurture a passion for reading through things like book fairs, reading challenges, storytelling sessions, bringing in authors to talk to students.
Making it engaging, making it social.
Exactly. These collective efforts create a positive feedback loop. They help counteract the digital distractions. They ensure reading remains valued, cherished, integral. They build a culture where deep literacy isn't just a skill, but a celebrated way of engaging with the world.
Okay, one last big question. We can't talk about the digital age without talking about artificial intelligence, AI. One might reasonably ask, if AI can now summarize complex books for us in seconds, or even write new text that sounds human, why do we still need to bother reading carefully ourselves? Is AI making deep reading obsolete?
That's a really important, increasingly relevant question. And the Telefonica article touches on it, though maybe indirectly. The Ljubljana Manifesto provides a kind of foundational answer. It notes that because of the propensity for efficiency, the complexity of reading is seen as a problem to be solved by simplification, rather than as a mirror of human complexity.
So we see complexity as a bug and not a feature, and AI offers a simplification shortcut.
That's the tendency it points out. Yes, a societal push to simplify what is inherently complex, maybe seeing deep reading as inefficient, relying solely on AI for understanding risks falling right into that trap. But there are at least two critical reasons why human deep reading remains absolutely essential, despite AI's impressive skills.
Okay, what are they?
First, and maybe most importantly, we need to retain control over the formation of one's own opinion. If you outsource the interpretation, the synthesis of complex ideas to an AI, you are, by definition, outsourcing your own critical thinking. You lose the nuance, the internal grappling, the personal intellectual work needed to form a truly informed and independent view.
You let the machine think for you.
In essence, yes. Second, for now at least, it seems pretty clear that human reading and writing brings something unique. Finesse, nuance and context and irony to texts. These are distinctly human skills. They're rooted in our lived experience, our emotional intelligence, our understanding of subtle social cues that AI is still, frankly, learning to mimic.
So AI might miss the subtext, the irony, the deeper feeling.
It often does. While the gap narrows daily, there will likely continue to be texts, especially those with subtle layers of meaning, profound emotional depth, satire, complex philosophy that an AI just cannot fully decode, appreciate, or engage with in the same way a human mind enriched by human experience can. Our messy, complex lives inform our reading in ways an algorithm can't replicate. Not yet, anyway.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what does this mean for you listening right now? We've taken this deep dive into the really profound, multifaceted world of reading. We've seen how books are so far from obsolete. They offer these unique, maybe irreplaceable benefits that go way beyond just getting information. They cultivate empathy, they deepen our knowledge, they sharpen our language skills, they even boost our mental well-being, maybe even help us live longer. It's pretty amazing.
And yet we've also confronted the very real challenges of our time, the pervasive pull towards superficial reading, the constant digital noise, the subtle trap of just passively consuming content that asks too little of us. But the message that really emerges from all these sources seems clear and maybe even urgent. The ability to read well, to read deeply, it isn't just a personal hobby anymore. It's a crucial tool for life. It's a powerful weapon for understanding this incredibly complex world around us. And it's a vital defense in a society that seems increasingly prone to simplification, polarization, and, frankly, misinformation.
Ultimately, maybe it just boils down to paying attention. Choosing where you focus your most precious resource, your time, your focus. As Paul D. Wilk reminds us so beautifully, we have this incredible privilege right at our fingertips. We can pick up a book whenever we want and commune with Plato, Hume, Dickinson, Shakespeare, Dante, Steinbeck, Aurelius, Woolf, Tolstoy, Augustine, and countless others far better and wiser than we will ever be. These incredible minds, they don't ask for our money, they don't ask for our clicks, they're just waiting patiently, open, accessible, ready to share their wisdom.
It's all there, a vast, rich inheritance just waiting for us.
It's wisdom and insight there for the taking.
The only thing you truly have to pay is attention.
So as you go about your week, maybe you'll consider, what book will you pick up next to take a deep dive? What new world will you explore? What new perspective might challenge you? And perhaps, how many more lives will you live through the quiet, timeless power of reading? Until next time, keep diving deep.